Hello everybody, and here is a short video that I hope will work out well. We're going to go over just a little review of using the features for pivot tables, and I've already done a video on how to use subtotals. So we've got this set of data here, and I want to find out a couple of things. Well, actually, one thing here, I set this format back to normal, so now I've lost all my dates. So I can just, of course, remember that dates in Excel are only integers. So I can select all these and format them as the short date, and that is exactly the way I wanted to see it. Now, my computer is a little bit different than the way the computers are set up at school. So when you download the file, which was in Chapter 5, sorry, it's actually Module 6, the July file, it should work out fine the way your computer is going to set it for. But basically, first thing I want to do, I'm going to insert a table just so we can get familiar with that process, because using the insert table allows us to have these filter and sorting tools. So I can now sort in the date, and if I try sorting the amount from smallest to largest, you'll notice that using those two tools on top, I can only have one, let's say, well, I can have one column sorted at the same at a single time. So if I want to move it, wow, I'm really wheezing in my basement here. If I want to show, so I want to sort two columns at the same time, I have to go to the Data tab and use this Sort tool. So remember, on the Data tab, here's where I have access to more of the stuff I'm going to work with. Excuse me. But for one thing is the sorting tool, because it allows me to sort by the amount, and by adding a level, I'm going to then sort by sales date from oldest to newest, and I can hit OK. It doesn't really matter what you choose here. I want you to know that you can use two columns or more to sort by when you use this sort tool. So I hit on OK, and now these are sorted that way. I can also use the filter. I can use the filter instead of sorting. Please get to know the difference between sorting and filtering. And I have different text filters here. There is a way to filter by color. I can't do that right now because it's not enabled. But if I remove this checkbox and choose residential care and hit OK, then if I look down in the status bar, it'll tell me there are 27 records, and a filter has been applied to this sheet. So if I look all the way down here, I'm only seeing 47 records instead of 105, which is great. The other thing I want to know about tables is I can right click and I can choose table, and I can either have a totals row or I can convert it back to a range, which makes it not a table, makes it go back to a range. So I can add the total row, and I get, probably by default, it's usually the sum of all the values here under amount. So this is the sum of amount, and by changing that drop down arrow, I can choose average. And I can then format that. It's just a cell still, so I can come here and format that to 2 decimal places if I want. And format it to accounting, not currency, if I want to. But I can also come here and I can count the number of entries. So again, there are 27 different days, which are here. I don't really want to do any other kind of calculations on days of the week. It doesn't make any sense. But I can see that's pretty much all I want to do. So maybe I can delete that, and I leave this filter here to count the number of rows that show up. That could be something you'd want to do. So that's one thing I can do. I can also go here and I can add individual care, and now there are 53 records. But now I've got individual care and residential care kind of all mixed in. So that's using pivot tables. Oh, I can go to the design of the pivot table and I can change certain things, like have the columns banded. It already has banded columns. No, it doesn't have banded columns. It has banded rows. See, this one is blue, this one is white, this one is blue, this one is white, this one is blue, this one is white. That's banded rows. And we want to maybe change a style, so it might be something like this one. This one is medium 21. There, that looks kind of nice. It's not too bad. So that's using the Oh, it's like 11 o'clock. I'm sorry about the video. What did I just use? The pivot tables. No, I didn't use pivot tables. I used tables. Okay, now let's do something else. I'm going to hold down the control key and I can copy this, make a copy of this entire sheet. So this whole sheet has been copied. So I'm going to rename this one, and this one is ready to pivot. You could really call it anything you want. That's not important right now. But what I want to do is I'm going to clear the sorting on this. So I don't want that sorted. All right, yeah, well, I do. I want it sorted in oldest to newest. I don't want it filtered anymore. So I'm going to clear the filter. So there's a bunch of things that we want to be able to do. Now I did show you the subtotal video. So remember that subtotals, it was great that I could have totals by day, which was one thing, but I wasn't able to easily create totals for business type because my data isn't structured that way. And what you don't want to do is make changes to the data. We're in Excel, and it is easy with small data sets like this one. 106 rows is a small data set. It is not millions of rows of data or hundreds of columns across. So we don't have that problem. But I don't normally, it's not good data analysis to take a column and move it from one place to another or just pick it up and change it. It's just not good. It's not the way we do things. But one thing we can do is if I want to be able to group things, but let's say I want to find the average amount for residential care, then I can use a pivot table. So I'm going to go back to the Insert tab, and the Insert tab is another way to get pivot tables. And I can do what's called a recommended pivot table. So this is maybe the first way to start with, because with a recommended pivot table, it has these kind of samples where this one is sum of the amount by business. And I actually want the average amount by business. So this is close to what I want, but not perfect. Some of these other ones are going to be kind of silly. Sum of sales ID by business. Well, adding up the sales ID doesn't make any logical business sense. So I wouldn't do that either. So really, none of these make any sense. I could choose a blank pivot table from here, but I'm going to actually choose this top one because of sum of amount by business. And it even has the total answers here. Look at this, 32,996 is the total amount for this pivot table, so I hit OK. So it's actually created the pivot table for me. I'm going to zoom in here just to make it easier to see. So pivot table, as soon as we get the pivot table, I'm in the pivot table tools. I have analyze and I have design. I'm going to stay on analyze most of the time. And I have this new pane right here. This is called a window pane or a pane of information that contains my pivot table fields. So if you're ever looking around or you click on something and you can't see them anymore, what you will do is actually just turn on this pivot field list. So again, pivot table tools, analyze, field list, and it brings it back. So what I have here is all of the data added up for individual rows. So if I can look on my screen, I'll see a filters group, a columns group, a rows group, and a values group. So I brought business down as a row. So that was here. All I did is just click on it and I can like clear everything. If I click amount, it becomes a value. So numbers that you can calculate should go under this value area here, right? It's got the little sum symbol, but I can do things other than sum them. Now under rows, you kind of have to think about what the data is that you want, because I want business to be in a row. I want each row to have a business name in it. So now I just put it in rows. So it is it's like super easy. If I wanted to break this out even more, watch how I can take a Saturday or a day of the week and drag it into columns. Now we get something that looks a little more interesting. I can see almost all of the data provided to me. Grand total adds up to 32,000. Grand total for group homes adds up to 7,000. Grand total for group homes on a Monday is $999.23. So see how now each of the day of the week is a column in my pivot table. So that one is a pretty neat feature. But I'm actually going to take column out. I don't want day columns there. I'm going to drag it and see it's got an X on it now. So just let it go. It goes back to normal. And I want to play with this feature here called value field settings, because I'm going to make some changes to the sum of amount. Usually the default names of fields don't make any sense, or they're not very nice names. I can have here, if it was sum, I would change it to total amount, but I don't want the total amount. I'm actually going to change this to average, and that's the name. And I'm going to choose the word average, and from this type of calculation. So summarize the value field by average. So now I can hit OK, and now it's the average of the amount. So this is all the average. My total average is 314. But I've got a lot of decimal places here. I want to maybe format that as currency. I can do that here, but with pivot tables, there's an even better way. I can go back to the value field settings. So I choose value field settings, and I go to number format. There's number format there, and there's a currency, which is always 2 decimal places by default. So I hit OK, and I hit OK, and now I get a nice pivot table for my data. There's one last thing you should know about pivot tables, and that is the fact that I can go from these averages or totals, and I'm going to go to value field settings. And I'm going to actually change the show values as. So I go to show values as. So this average for group home, $274, is like an amount based on the total. But if I say percent of grand total, then I'm going to see that all of these make up some sort of percentage of a grand total. That number doesn't make any sense for averages. So how do we fix that? Good thing, take those out. Yes, no, that didn't do it either. That was formatting. Let's go back and see if we can get something useful. If I go to value fields, I can go sum. Sum makes more sense. Now we have a total. Yep, that adds up to 100. So 22, 35, 11, and 31. That adds up to 100%. I could, of course, select those and just hit percent, and it gets rid of my decimal places. Oops, lost my field tables. When you click off of a pivot table, you have your field tables, your pivot table fields disappear. So you can actually add multiple pivot tables to the same page. It's just not done all that often unless you know what you're doing, or you're making a dashboard. I can go back to value field settings. So I want you to know or remember, because this was covered in the training somewhere, I can see that it's a percent of the row total, or percent of the parent row total, or all these kind of things. Difference in ranks from largest to smallest. What happens if I do that? So I see that residential care is number 1 and individual is number 4. Doesn't really give us any meaning in this case, so I could switch it back to percent of grand totals. I can find out that residential care was actually the lowest, so number 1 was ranked lowest. So that was maybe a little bit of a side note. So I'm going to stop the video now, and I'll make the next video on pivot charts. See ya!